Park Kyongni is one of the great voices of the Korean literary canon. Her works are legendary in their native Korea. And what we have here is a collection of stories that she wrote during the 1950s and 60s, all translated by different Korean translators who've all done such a wonderful job of bringing them to English. Park Kyongni had a fascinating life. She was born during the Japanese occupation of Korea, she grew up through World War II and the Korean War, and she was writing during a series of South Korean dictatorships through the 1950s and 60s. So that means that these stories are coming from a very specific time and place. They are about a very specific time and place, but they remain extremely relatable no matter who you are and where you come from, because these are stories of loss, of love, of disappointment, of regret, jealousy, brooding, aggression, fear. Every powerful feeling that we have as humans is explored here in this collection of 6 amazing stories. It explores the power of translation. You have one great Korean literary legend being translated by some of the biggest and best voices in Korean to English translation right now. People like Sophie Bowman, Anton Hur, Mattho Mandersloot. These translators have all added their soul to this. This is an incredible work that celebrates one singular voice in Korean literature, but that voice is being brought to life by multiple people. In that sense, it is such a wonderful example of literary teamwork, and I think that that is beautiful. Did I say there were 6 stories in here? There are 7, but there are 8 translators, because there's also a commentary at the back that was translated by an 8th person. And the stories in here differ in size. They actually almost get larger as they go. The first 2 are particularly short, and then the penultimate story is 100 pages long, so it makes up a really decent chunk of this book. What's also interesting from my perspective, from my experience, is that these stories actually get better as they go. When I first started this, I simply read it in order, and I didn't love the first 2 stories, but I really liked the 3rd one, I liked the 4th one even more, and as it went on, and the final story is my favourite. This is a book that, for my money, gets better and better and better as it goes, which is really cool. When you read a short story collection, you never know which story is going to impact you the most, which one is going to be a bit of a dud, which one is going to be your new favourite short story by that author. You don't know if they'll all be duds, or if they'll all be bangers and you can't pick a favourite. But here with The Age of Doubt, in my experience reading this collection, they literally get better and better and better, which feels wonderful. I love when I listen to an album and the songs get better and better as they go. It's rare and it's a wonderful feeling, and you get it here with this. Interestingly, there are 2 stories in the middle of this collection that have similar names. The Age of Darkness and the titular The Age of Doubt. Not only do they have similar names, but they also have a very, very similar event happen within them. For The Age of Darkness, this event is pretty much the entire story. And for The Age of Doubt, it's one aspect of the story. But I'm going to talk about it because I just find it so intriguing. In The Age of Darkness, which was translated by Dasom, who I got to meet and have dinner with in Berlin a few years ago. That was lovely. We have a mother who runs a shop. Where did the light go? I think it's gonna rain. We have a mother who runs a shop, and she has a child. The child's uncle takes him on a hike, and while they're up there, the kid gets hurt. And of course his mother blames the uncle. Then, the kid is taken to hospital and looked after, and the kid ends up dying. And the mother blames the hospital for negligence, the fact that they didn't do very, very simple procedures that they should have done. Then, in The Age of Doubt, something pretty similar happens. The Age of Doubt is a little bit more political and topical, and it deals specifically with that moment in time that it was written in. It begins with a woman who lost her husband to the Korean War. At the beginning of the story, her husband mentions to her that he saw someone die in the streets, he saw their entrails, he saw this discarded body, only for him to then also die very, very soon after, I think maybe even the next day. So she's lost her husband to the war. Then her son tragically dies as well. But just like in that first story, The Age of Darkness, she blames the hospital for their negligence. It's a very weird moment where you honestly wonder, wait, is this the same person? Is this the same kid? Is this the same story? No, it's not. And I just found that very interesting. But the titular The Age of Doubt is definitely one of the most affecting stories in here. It's translated by Anton Hur, who is a legend of Korean translation, and he's done as wonderful a job here as he always does. This particular story, The Age of Doubt, kind of exemplifies the entire collection, which might be why it is also the title of the collection itself. Because it's a story that kind of has everything. It deals with the Korean War, it deals with the aftermath, it deals with ordinary people and what they had left and what they had to struggle with. It also deals with everyday loss. This woman loses her husband to the war and loses her son to something completely unrelated to the war. Some tragedy, some accident, something that could happen to anyone. And it's a universal experience when you go through loss and grief and turmoil and you feel hopeless and depressed and you wonder what life could possibly offer you now. What is left for you to celebrate, to enjoy? How do you justify living your life? How are you supposed to enjoy this thing that once was all you had? Life. Now it feels like nothing. And that is incredibly, painfully relatable. I think The Age of Doubt is a wonderful example of Park Kyongni's command over everything. Language, emotion, events, people, lives, relationships. She understood all of these things with a frankness that almost makes you uncomfortable, and you see all of that in that titular story, The Age of Doubt. The longest story in here, as I said, is about 100 pages long, and it's called The Era of Fantasy. And it's translated by Mattho Mandersloot, who is amazing. His story about how he became a Korean to English translator is incredible. He's Dutch, and so English is his second language, Korean his third, and he is such a powerhouse of a translator. When you read The Era of Fantasy, the blending of her prose with his translation is poetry. It's absolutely gorgeous. There is a dramatic flair to the language in this story. It feels almost gothic. There is a lot of melodrama to the language in this particular story. It feels sometimes like you're reading Dracula or Frankenstein. There is hyperbole and power and strength and weight behind the language, especially at the beginning. And it's also a story that was heavily inspired by the author's own childhood, as is explored in the commentary at the back, which I urge you to read once you've finished all the stories. In that commentary, it is discussed how that story was very, very emblematic of her own childhood. And it deals with lesbian lust between a girl and another girl that she just kind of obsesses over. And it talks about how that kind of a gay relationship had its own name at this time in this place and was kind of accepted and encouraged, but for pretty unhealthy reasons as we would view them today. But the principal of this school is a Japanese man, and there is a Shinto shrine in the school, and this principal doesn't appreciate or encourage this kind of a relationship, and so she feels complex feelings about it. I won't tell you any more, but it's an amazing 100-page, almost novella within this short story collection. But, as I said, my favourite story is actually the final tale in here. And that story is called The Sickness No Medicine Can Fix. And it is perhaps the most universal story in here. It's not specifically about the Korean War or dictatorship or the Japanese occupation. It feels like it could have been written any time, any place. It has a universality to it. It kind of feels medieval in terms of its setting. And that's because it's very rural. It's set in a small village with no technology mentioned. It's a very humble way of life, and it feels like it could have been written, as I said, anywhere. What I loved so much about this story is that it is one of jealousy. It is one of small towns full of small people getting angry and jealous. Our main characters are a married couple, and the husband is obsessed with this woman who works at the bar in the village. At one point, she ran off with a man and then came crawling back, and this husband remains obsessed with this girl, and now she's back, and now he wants to get close to her. In fact, he already has. His wife is jealous, she's angry, she gossips with the other women in the village, rightly so, and we're getting their two perspectives. This awful, philandering, useless man and his aggressive, jealous wife who has every right to be jealous. But this is a story of people being twisted up by their feelings, by their lust, by their aggression towards one another, and also about gossip and small villages and our obsessions if we live in places like this, small communities where people gossip and talk in circles and obsess over one another. It's absolutely riveting. It's really the kind of short, small, intimate, almost toxic tale that I just adore so much. I loved this story in particular. So as you can see, there's a lot of dynamism in The Age of Doubt. These stories all explore very, very different things, very different settings, characters, and events. And sometimes they're inspired by Park Kyongri's own life and experiences. This is a very, very important, beautiful, fascinating collection. It is essential reading if you're a fan of Korean literature, because she was one of the great voices of the Korean literary canon, as I said at the beginning. Few people are as important to their nation's literature as her. And that is just amazing. And the fact that we have 8 different translators translating 7 different stories and a commentary, this is a complete introduction to the works of one of Korea's greatest writers. How could anything be more important than this in that sense, if you look at it through that lens? It's also beautiful to look at and published by Honford Star, who always do wonderful, incredible things as an indie publisher, and I've mentioned them 100 times for good reason. Please check out The Age of Doubt. It is amazing. Subscribe for books.